Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast. Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Joining me today on this roundtable are four very expressive people from Network Music. So I welcome Terry McBride, CEO, Chris Norwood, Head of Strategy, Colleen Novak, Music Manager, and Karen Mix, Director of People Operations. And we're discussing a book by Dr. Chloe Carmichael entitled Can I Say That? Why Free Speech Matters and How to Use It Fearlessly. In this book, Chloe explains how to unlock the mental health benefits of free speech. Chloe's a clinical psychologist and USA Today best-selling author. And in the podcast with Chloe, we discussed the negative side of thought and speech suppression, including fragility, lowered resilience and susceptibility to bullying, as well as the questionable benefits of secondary gain, and especially the prevalence of victimhood and victim signalling. But more positively, we discussed not only how free speech encourages resilience and ego strength, how it unlocks creativity and growth, but is also a foundation for civic virtue and civic health. And this includes the virtue of restraining one's own free speech in consideration of others. It's a very timely book, and I'm sure it will stimulate vibrant discussion with my good friends from Network Music. And here are my good friends from Network Music, my very expressive friends. And as always, I have a feeling that you're going to have a lot to say about Can I Say That? Just before I let you loose on the world, I think it's a really timely topic. And when I read it, I had mixed reactions to it, which I think is all credit to Chloe, because it's a topic that's extremely important and is hard to talk about. With that, who would like to kick off? What are your insights, reactions, thoughts about Chloe's book?
I can jump in there.
Great.
I'm going to go right to the end of the podcast when you
Yeah.
talked about like politics and religion are off limits, because it just instantly took me to my family Christmas dinner table. And Dad, you can't say that. There's a total polarization around the dinner table. And so in my family, it's been exactly that. Politics and religion are off limits. But after listening to this podcast, it's like, well, how unfortunate is that? Like, it's really too bad, because we've gotten away from the opportunity to be able to have open debate and conversation around important things. So my question for you, for me, that rule came into place because it just gets so uncomfortable to the point where you want to get up and walk away. So how can get okay with the comments and opinions that are so fundamentally in contrast with your own? How can you try to get to a place where you can foster more of a healthy and productive conversation?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, everyone listening to what you just said will, of course, have their own experience and their own version of exactly what you're talking about, right?
Mhm.
And it is difficult. Um, and Chloe does, in that final section of the book, talk about strategies. It's not necessarily about changing another person's mind, but it is about, as she says, keeping your own mind. Um, and I think I agree with you. I think it's a problem that we can't talk about the most important things when we have differences. And I think one of the problems is that we tend to um, demonize the other person. We kind of we're offended by their ideas, and we jump to we can easily jump to the view that they're a bad person, they're evil, and so on and so on. And of course, they have their version of that for us, right? So um, at the risk of of diverting our conversation a little bit, I've just about a third of the way through a book by Kurt Gray called Outraged. You can see why it might be relevant. And the the thesis of the book, he's a moral psychologist. The thesis of the book is that morality is all emerged as a natural part of our human evolution to help us keep each other under control and keep things within parameters. But basically, it's based on this idea of perception of harm, and that the, obviously we evolved, or as all animals, we're hyper alert to potential of harm. And with human beings, that of course, because we're so social, that implies harm from other people and harm to other people, right? So if you see someone beating up on a kid, you know, uh, every culture in the world is going to say that's an immoral act, right? Child abuse or whatever. And but the point that Kurt Gray is getting to, and I forgive me because I haven't read the rest of the book, but I'm pretty sure I know where he's heading, is if we perceive the other person's opinions, especially strong ones, very emotive, is coming from a sense of them feeling hurt, them feeling potentially harmed, then they're just like us with their views, right? So, I remember having discussions with my mother about religion. She was a staunch Irish Catholic, and one of her, I'm a non-believer. I was raised, but I'm obviously Catholic culturally, but spiritually not. And so her view, and I used to reject it, but I've got more sympathy for it now. She would say it's ruining society. People don't have a belief in God. There's nothing to make them. There's no values. There's no. Now I don't agree with that argument, but it worried her deeply. She felt there was harm being done by people not having some sort of absolute standard by which to judge. She was worried about the world slipping into a relativistic anarchy, right? I respect that view. I don't agree with it, but I didn't respect it enough when she was alive. Does that make sense? So I think we have to find a way of finding the person's shared humanity and coming and so inquiring with them, why do you think that? Because I I react strongly to that your view. I find it but you want to show interest in why a person actually thinks. All right. So it's not a completely satisfactory answer, but uh, if we can't talk about the most important things, I think we're in trouble. Yeah. Ooh, it's hard, isn't it? What else, guys?
I can kind of jump in next because very similar theme.
Yeah.
One of as you sort of said there, in some ways, the way that we start to solve these problems is by reaching across the aisle, so to speak, and recognizing that humanity in the person on the other side.
Yeah.
And that's very challenging because it's so easy to define that other side as other, as something different, and project motives perhaps onto that. But the part that I'm curious to tease out here is that I feel like also we have technology working against us in this endeavor of trying to like come together, bring people together.
Yeah.
And that's that, whereas a lot of these interactions might have happened over a table and now they might be happening over a table, but after all of this research that's happening online in silos. And those silos are designed to reinforce these perspectives rather than
Yes.
challenge and open them up to other worldviews. So by the time you maybe are having that one-on-one conversation, that person's had a lot of reinforcement,
Yeah.
maybe based around that fear and how this worldview solves that fear.
Yes.
And how if all of us and the viewers here like come out of this enlightened with that ability to think and be able to communicate or what's the word I'm looking for? Be empathetic and listen to that other side. But the other side or whatever that is, half of the world is not. It sort of feels like we're still not going to make any progress
Mm.
because you kind of need all parties to be willing to be open and listen.
Okay,
It,
so the
maybe I'm overthinking it, but I'm curious what
no,
you think.
no, no, you're not overthinking it. There's a lot of stepping off points here. So first off, we just talk about this idea of silos or echo chambers. Um, and you're right, the technology has um, significantly outstripped or moved beyond what we were designed for. Obviously, we were designed for small groups
Mhm.
from an evolutionary perspective, and you were living cheek to jowl with a person, so you needed to resolve things. But when you have these communities, and I put that in inverted commas, of people who may never meet each other, never see each other, and can say whatever they like with, things that you almost never would say face to face with people until you're very radicalized, right? I might get to that. Um, this is a very, very different thing. And then, as you say, we get inducted into communities of thought and communities of values, and and then a very interesting thing happens. Um, Belonging to that community becomes incredibly important. One's identity becomes tied to it, and to let's look at a very specific community. There is a community of people around Donald Trump,
Mhm.
his cabinet, the people in the GOP, etc., etc. They all know he's an absolute fuckwit. They know he's rapidly decaying cognitively. He's always been an extraordinarily immoral person. Um, but by degrees that they've lost the capacity to say that, and they're even some of them I think still believing even things that are unbelievable.
Mhm.
And this is not to demonize them. It's like just it's a cautionary tale about what can happen. I mean, there's been studies done into radicalization, studies done into cults, studies done into how people become um, progressively can be intelligent people can become to believe the most extraordinarily crazy shit. And it is a process of it almost becomes the more extreme the thought, um, the tighter the people hold together in an echo chamber, right? And then that is massively, as you say, amplified by the technology,
Mhm.
right? And and it's gratifying to have that degree of rightness because, of course, everyone else is sheep and don't see the truth. We are special because we've got this very unusual truth,
Mhm.
right? And so I think you're absolutely right. There is this. There's always been this problem. Of course, it's just the normal political problem between people within families and in
Mhm.
workplaces and so on. But now it's taken this, it's been massively amplified beyond the bounds of what we were designed for.
Yeah.
This is why people like Jonathan Haidt, and there's a whole movement about getting kids up to 16 off social media, because of the same kind of process that's going on. The other thing there is that outrage sells, and there is a commercial model based on attracting and holding attention. And so, as we say in psychology, the negative is more salient than the positive. You know, we have a negativity bias. So there's also a kind of commercial imperative behind keeping people polarized and keeping them angry, and forbidding, both parties trying to forbid certain types of speech, right? So there was a lot of silencing of people on the left, and now, of course, we see a lot of silencing from the so-called right. The left and right are starting to dissolve as concepts, but that's a whole other topic, right? I know I don't think you're overthinking it at all, Chris. Um, it, we live in times where, now it's not fair that we may have to be unilateral and proactive, and for quite some time, and maybe never, the other side doesn't reciprocate.
Yeah.
But that's no reason to not do it.
Mm-hmm.
Last time I looked, the universe wasn't designed to be fair, right? What's more important, I think this is Chloe's point too, is we want to regain our own mind. We want to regain our own thing, and it's more important what we do, right? And to, what's that saying? To be the change we wish to see. Like, but it takes a lot of courage in that. But I think the reaching behind. There's a guy called Dave McCraney. He's a psychologist, and he wrote a book called How Minds Change. And it's a very interesting book. And there are a couple of strategies that he goes into great depth to in the book. One is called street canvassing. And this is basically people who were canvassing people on opinions around, like, abortion and the hot topics, homosexuality, etc. And listening in such a way with curiosity as to how people have come to their views, and validating not their opinions, but
Process. Yeah.
but the process by which people tend to soften then their views when they realize that they're being respected. So I think the key here is, one, to be the person who we are, and have the courage to speak. That was Chloe's thing, I think. And I think she's probably more, yes, she is, I think, more to the right of the political spectrum than me. But I felt that the cold chill of wokeism as a man, as a middle-aged man. There's just certain no-go topics.
Mm-hmm.
I've experienced those in both my personal life and my professional life. Well, you just can't talk about that topic because you're a man of a certain age, or you're just a man, right? So, and she had a version of that led to her, to actually speaking up, and I think it was quite a struggle for her, and then the book came out of it. So it's, like I said, it's very, very, very timely. But I feel like I've spoken too long. Who's next?
I can go. Okay.
Wonderful, Colleen.
I think, kind of rounding some of that out, I think that you know, talking about the allows you to cognitively come to terms with it was one of the things that I think that you had
Yes.
mentioned, and the talking cure.
Yeah.
It's important to have a voice. It's important to, if you're struggling with something, to talk about it, to get it out, and you see it differently once it's out.
Yes.
So I think that kind of ties into what we've been talking about here, but also just separately, if you're struggling with something
Yeah.
and needing to have a voice, not bottle it up.
Yeah, totally. I mean, obviously, in the therapy game, very often people come into therapy and they say the things that they feel like they can't say to other people. So there's a bit of a, it's like father confessor sort of aspect, I guess. It's just a secular confessional. Um, but there is something very frequently liberating for people to be able to say what they're not allowed to say. Almost, and often it's, I don't want to go all Freudian, but it's often it takes a while for them to realize what they're repressing in themselves, what they feel like they can't say, even to themselves, right? So I think that part's really, really important. But and I don't know whether this is what you're going to raise, Terry. Just nod your head furiously if it is. But um, this is she begins the book by basically making an argument for why words are violent. Ah, yeah, okay. I had a feeling, Terry. I don't know how and why. So I might just, rather than steal your thunder, just hand to you.
Well, I think Colleen, Karen, and Chris have covered a lot of things. Um,
Yeah.
First off, a few things that I just found really, really interesting is that the working memory at any one time can only have 7 thoughts, plus or minus.
Plus or minus two. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
which,
anyway.
which I thought was wow, okay. And then the minute that you speak of something, and this leans into what Colleen was talking about, you then become detached from it. Found that a like very interesting concept. And then the impact of self-censorship
Yeah,
to you emotionally.
yeah,
That I also found interesting. And then the last topic, and one that did raise the hairs on the back of my head was this thought of, if someone's spewing toxic stuff, and any rational person on either side of this knows that, and then they're using that to economically gain from it. Are they poisoning others around them that would not have been poisoned if that had been muted? And that's the one part, even after her whole thing, and she brought me a long ways away along that whole path, but I couldn't get over that one issue.
yeah,
Is if this toxic speech turns one kid who wasn't toxic and turns them toxic, and they start beating up on their girlfriend or whatever it might be, why should we protect that speech?
yeah. Now, I seem to recall, and it's still been a little while since I read the book, but I seem to recall she does address this towards the end of the book, saying there are limits on free speech. And I think you have constitutional limits in the United States, for example, and we certainly have uh, uh, we have legal limits in Australia, and we have pretty strict libel laws, for example, and so I think she would say no, there are limits on what is acceptable, and for example, there's a lot of debate about whether students, are trying to ban certain speakers at universities because they have hateful views, and I'm pretty nervous about that as a principle, that we ought to allow people to say hateful things, right? But I note someone like Sam Harris, for example, often speaks about not platforming people because he doesn't have to. Like they can find other platforms. We don't have to also um, give people a megaphone. Um, so uh, this is not a straightforward question now. Obviously, in America, they have First Amendment rights, and free speech, I think, was a revolutionary thing to enshrine in the Constitution, and it's spread all around the world. So I think it's coming, and there was a sense in which that was being lost. There was whole areas where people weren't allowed to say various things. So, I think one of your favorite metaphors, Terry, is that things are like a pendulum and they swing, and they often swing too far, and then they eventually equilibrate and come back to the center. So I think that's in a way one way I see this. Language can be harmful, and it can incite violence, for example. So that constitutionally is against the law to incite violence, to directly incite violence, right? But there's going to be a grey area there, and but this, like everything else, needs to be openly and and continuously discussed. If we're talking about free speech, then this very issue needs to be constantly explored, right? And yeah, I mean, if you're a private enterprise, you can choose whoever you want to to come in, to come onto your show or talk on your podcast, or to that's not restricting freedom of speech. It's like you can talk to whoever you like to, or listen to whoever you like to. But we do have a problem, and that is, as links to what Chris was saying about technology. You can get platforms. The manoverse, filled with some very hateful people, who are speaking into a lot of hurt. If we take that particular, incel type space, there's a lot of disenfranchisement and insecurity and suffering that then leads to radicalization. And so that's a real danger of this kind of hateful speech, is that it's kind of cynically tapping into that. I mean, it's the authoritarian playbook, isn't it? Right. And do you remember that huge mistake that Hillary Clinton made in calling the followers of Trump deplorables?
Now that wouldn't even register.
No, that's right. But what it showed is a lack of understanding and empathy for actually, we're talking about understanding the pain or the fear of harm and the experience of harm of the other side as maybe why they have the views they have.
Yeah.
Right. Often, if you think about warfare, and let's just say, in all war there are atrocities, and there can be generational memories of the harm caused, right? And therefore, that people feel like they can do heinous things in return.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't think it's open slather, Terry. I think just to come back to, right. And to be fair to Chloe, I think at the end she talks about this, that you have to have restraint, is one of the chapters, and you need to be thinking about the care for others. Yeah, and so I don't think it's an open slather, because that would create um, just too much hurt.
Yeah, I do agree with that, but unfortunately, the reality is, to Chris's point about social media platforms, that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, and that's why, again, I think this is a very timely thing. How do we navigate this? How do we not shut people down, but how do we also create a healthier um, climate, a healthier culture, right? And it's like with social media in particular, it just happened so fast. It wasn't planned, and it just took over the world. And so now we're maybe trying to reel it back in. I suspect AI is going to have a similar kind of impact, and it will have to be reeled in. According to what is actually better for human beings, to bring it back to the topic of this whole podcast, this whole project, how can we just, we want to be able to live a human life and to increase well-being and increase happiness. And part of it is about not feeling muzzled that I can't speak my truth, but also part of it is about taking care of each other in the way we speak.
Yeah.
Right. So but it's desperately needed, desperately, because people are losing the capacity. And one of the scary things that I talked to Dr. Regal. It's a podcast coming up. She has um, an approach she calls NeuroWell. She works in school. It's about creating better cultures for kids in schools and retraining teachers towards this. And so one of the things she was talking about was the kids, they're lagging, and I think there's very objective evidence for this. They're lagging in executive function development, frontal lobe development. It's partly because they don't have to, so their memories aren't as good. Their short-term memory is not as good because they don't have to remember telephone numbers, and their executive function's not as honed because they just get an AI to give them a summary but more crucially, their social skills aren't as developed because they're not actually spending as much time. Even when they're with each other, they're each on separate devices and they're not having to. And so they don't know how to deal very well with differences and navigating. So I think this issue of free speech is going to get more profound in the next generation, not because of people banning speech or anything like that, because the kids aren't learning how to hold conversations,
Yeah.
especially with different age groups and different opinions. So it's not only timely for what's happened, I think it's looking into the future a little bit. Yeah. Now, while I was setting up this podcast, you guys were having a lovely discussion, and I was a little bit distracted because I was setting up, the technical things here. In our discussion up to now, have I missed some of the things you were talking about? Because you were very animated.
I don't think so. I think we covered it all.
think we covered
Okay.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, good, good. Because I guess the point here, for our listeners, is to say this is not a discussion that you nail and it's done.
Mhm.
But it's a conversation we should continuously have because it's really, really difficult to disagree with each other with respect, but also to learn something from the other person's perspective. Otherwise, our recourse is a very primitive one, and that's to see them as the enemy.
Yeah.
See them as dangerous, and we double down on our own beliefs, and any deviation is then punished by our in-group.
Yeah. I
Right?
have to hop.
What's
Uh,
that?
I have to hop. I have a call with another Aussie.
You poor thing.
I like that.
So, no, I think that's pretty good timing anyway. Thanks, guys, for your time. And as always, your wonderful insights. And I look forward to our next conversation. You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you like the podcast and want to know more, my website is www.drchris.life. There you'll find links to my various social media posts, a newsletter, and lots more. And share the podcast with people you like so they can like it too. And a little more cello and guitar from the wonderful duo Desire and Date.